My name is Mark Davis, and I've always lived a simple life. At 45, I was content running my small auto repair shop on the outskirts of town, far from the bustling streets where business executives and lawyers spent their days. I had my bungalow, a steady routine, and a family that, despite its imperfections, was my anchor. I wasn't the kind of guy who dreamed of riches or prestige. Give me a well-done job and a peaceful evening, and I was set. But everything changed the day the phone rang. It was a Thursday afternoon, a quiet one by all accounts. I had a car in the shop, an old rusted sedan that seemed to be held together by sheer willpower and some decent welding. The sun was low in the sky, and I was under the hood, hands deep in the engine, when the phone rang. The shrill sound of it sliced through the calm, and I wiped my hands on a rag before answering. On the other end was a woman's voice, polite, formal, but with an edge of something that made me nervous before she even introduced herself. "This is Clara Richards from Richards & Johnson Law Firm. I'm calling regarding your late aunt, Rebecca Johnson," she said. Her words hit me like a punch in the gut, and for a moment I thought I must have misheard her. It had been over a decade since I'd seen Rebecca, my father's sister, the one who always seemed to have everything figured out while I was just me. She'd been a lawyer, building an empire from the ground up, while I was just trying to make a living with grease and oil. We hadn't spoken much after I refused to follow in her footsteps, the last time being when she'd told me I was wasting my potential by sticking to a job like mine. I remember that day so clearly, her disappointment seeping through every word. But I never regretted it. I had my own path. Still, hearing about her now, years later, was jarring. She had passed away? "I'm sorry to inform you that Rebecca passed away, Mr. Davis," Clara continued, her tone softening. "Her will is being read this Friday at 3 p.m., and you've been named as a beneficiary. It's important that you attend." I blinked, standing there in the middle of the shop, my hand still holding the phone. The words didn't make sense. Me, a beneficiary? I hadn't been a part of her life for so long, and to hear this now out of the blue, it felt like a mistake. I hadn't even known she was sick. The last time I'd heard anything about her was from a mutual acquaintance who mentioned her latest business venture. She had built a law firm that was worth millions, making a name for herself, and yet she was naming me in her will. I stood there for a moment, caught between confusion and disbelief, before finding my voice again. "Thank you," I said, trying to sound more composed than I felt. "I'll be there." After hanging up, I sat down at my workbench. My heart was still racing, my thoughts scattered. I glanced over at the rusted sedan, its engine still cracked open and in need of repair, but I couldn't focus on it. This wasn't just about a will or some inheritance, it was about a rift, a part of my past I'd buried deep for years. What did she want me for now? Did she feel guilty for how things had ended? Or had something else happened that I didn't know about? That evening, after locking up the shop, I went home and tried to settle into the rhythm of my evening. My wife, Sarah, was making dinner, and the sound of her humming along to the radio filled the house with warmth. But even as I sat at the table trying to focus on the meal, the phone call kept echoing in my mind. Rebecca Johnson, my aunt, gone, and me, her nephew, named as a beneficiary. I thought about my old life with her, the visits we'd made when I was a kid, the promises she'd made about how successful I could be if only I followed her advice. But I never did. I chose my own path, one where the stakes weren't as high, but the rewards felt just as sweet. The auto repair shop was mine, and it was good enough for me. But now, this. $12 million and a business empire. How had I suddenly become a part of her world? I hadn't asked for any of this. And yet, here it was, pressing down on me like a weight I didn't know how to carry. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that the next day would be clearer, but all night I could hardly sleep. I tossed and turned, thoughts of the will and what it might mean for my future flooding my mind. Was this her way of making amends? Or was there something else? The next morning I woke up to the same quiet neighborhood I'd lived in for years. The sun was shining and the streets were empty, save for the occasional car passing by. It felt so normal, so unchanged, and yet my world felt like it had been tilted on its axis. As I drove to the lawyer's office the following day, the contrast between my humble life and the sleek downtown office grew more apparent with every passing block. The area was filled with high-rise buildings and expensive boutiques. I parked my truck in a nearby lot, took a deep breath, and walked inside. The air smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers, and the receptionist smiled politely as she directed me to the elevator. I felt like an outsider, walking into a world I wasn't sure I belonged to. When the elevator doors opened, I was greeted by Clara Richards and her colleague, Paul Turner, an older man with an air of authority about him. His greying hair and sharp suit made him seem like someone who was used to handling large matters that didn't include someone like me. As we sat down in the conference room, I could feel my hands tremble slightly as they opened the will. Rebecca's will, my aunt's final decisions that would somehow shape the next chapter of my life, whether I was ready for it or not. The room was too quiet, almost suffocating, as Clara began reading the will. I sat there, my hands resting stiffly in my lap, trying to process everything that had happened. The lawyer's voice was steady and professional, each word falling like a hammer strike against the fragile calm that had existed in my life just 24 hours ago. I hadn't asked for this, I thought again, and yet here I was, trying to make sense of the fact that my aunt, Rebecca Johnson, had left me more than I had ever dreamed of. I tried to focus on the words Clara was reading, but I kept drifting. A part of me still couldn't believe that I was actually sitting here, a part of the family again, after so many years of estrangement. My thoughts kept jumping to my father's side of the family, the people I grew up with. I had always been the black sheep, the one who wasn't driven by ambition, who didn't live for the next promotion or the next deal. And Rebecca, my aunt, had always been the opposite. She was driven, passionate, ruthless even, when it came to her success. As Clara went on, I finally began to pay attention. She was reading out bequests to various friends and colleagues, nothing out of the ordinary. But then she paused. It was as though time itself had stopped. She glanced at me over the rim of her glasses, her face unreadable. "To my nephew Mark Davis," she said, the words hanging in the air, heavy with their meaning. "I leave the sum of $12 million, as well as full ownership of Johnson Automotive Enterprises, including all properties and assets related to the business. This transfer is conditional upon Mr. Davis continuing operations for at least 5 years, or until such time as the company is sold or dissolved." My heart stopped. My mind spun. $12 million, and an entire business. Her business. I felt like I had just been struck by lightning. I heard the words, but they didn't make sense. Me? The guy who had spent his life fixing cars, getting grease under his fingernails, barely scraping by? I couldn't fathom it. Not in a million years. I glanced at Clara. Her eyes were still fixed on me, waiting for me to react. And yet I couldn't. I had no words. I had no idea what to think or feel. This wasn't just a financial windfall. This was a life-changing responsibility, a legacy I wasn't prepared for. Before I could even gather my thoughts, Clara continued reading, her voice steady. "The condition attached to this bequest is that Mr. Davis continues to run the business for a minimum of 5 years. In the event that the company is sold or dissolved, the inheritance will be forfeited. Mr. Davis is expected to demonstrate his commitment to the company's growth and success during this time." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My head was spinning, and all I could think about was the auto repair shop I ran, the shop that barely kept me afloat most months. And now, here I was, inheriting a business empire. I had no idea what to do with this responsibility. I could hardly run my own business, let alone one that had been built from the ground up by someone like Rebecca. I looked at Paul Turner, his eyes fixed on me, waiting for a reaction. There was no judgment in his expression, just patience. I realized then that he had probably seen this kind of shock before, in families just like mine, where an inheritance brings with it not just money, but a burden. I tried to speak, but my voice faltered. "This doesn't make sense," I finally managed to say, my voice trembling despite my attempts to steady it. "I don't understand. Why would she leave this to me? I'm not even part of her world. I didn't follow her path. I walked away from everything she wanted for me." Clara leaned back in her chair, her expression softening just slightly. "Mark, your aunt believed that your values, your work ethic, your ability to build something with your own hands would provide the stability the company needs, especially after her passing. She knew that you weren't the business tycoon she might have hoped for, but she also knew you had something more valuable than that. I shook my head. I couldn't grasp it. But why me? I asked again. I've barely even talked to her in years. She's left me with this huge responsibility, and I don't know the first thing about running a company like hers. Paul sighed softly, as though he had been expecting this reaction. He spoke slowly, as though carefully considering his words. Your aunt was very specific about her decision. She didn't want someone who would simply continue her work for the sake of wealth or prestige. She wanted someone who would carry her legacy forward in a way that aligned with her values, someone who would take what she had built and make it serve people, not just profit. I looked at Paul, then at Clara, both of them waiting for my next move. For the first time in my life, I realized that what Rebecca had left me wasn't just money. It wasn't just a business. It was a chance to prove that I could do more than just fix cars, that I could build something meaningful, that I could live up to the potential my aunt always saw in me, even if I didn't. And yet, I was terrified. Terrified of the responsibility. Terrified that I wasn't good enough for the task at hand. I had spent my whole life content in the knowledge that my purpose was to fix things, to make people's lives a little bit easier, one repair at a time. But this was something else entirely. I wasn't sure I was ready. Do you accept the terms of the will? Clara asked, breaking into my thoughts. I swallowed again, forcing myself to answer, though my voice barely came out in a whisper. I accept. I'll take it. I'll do my best. As I left the office, my mind was racing. The world outside seemed to move in slow motion, people walking down the street, going about their business, oblivious to the storm that was raging in my mind. I'd just inherited $12 million and a business empire, but all I could think about was the enormous responsibility I had just agreed to take on. My future had just been rewritten, and I wasn't sure whether to feel excited or overwhelmed. I started the drive back to my shop, my hands gripping the steering wheel, unsure of what was ahead. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about a legacy. It was about me, who I was, who I could become, and what kind of life I was going to build from here on out. As the days passed, the gravity of what I had inherited began to set in. At first, I tried to push it all out of my mind, telling myself that I'd deal with it when the time came. But the reality was relentless, gnawing at me from the moment I woke up each morning. $12 million and a business empire that had once belonged to Rebecca, my estranged aunt. I had always been content with my life, modest, simple, predictable. I didn't seek fortune or fame. But now, everything had changed. I had responsibilities I never wanted, expectations I wasn't sure I could meet. I spent the following week trying to get a grip on what had happened. I returned to the auto shop, but everything felt different. The familiar hum of the place, the smell of oil and gasoline, was still there, but it no longer felt like enough. The business empire I had inherited sat heavy on my shoulders, as though it were physically present, looming over me. I was no longer just the guy who fixed cars. Now, I was Mark Davis, the owner of Johnson Automotive Enterprises, a company with its fingers in far more pies than I had ever imagined. The first call I made was to David Perkins, the shop's longtime manager. He was in his mid-50s, and I trusted him more than anyone else to help me figure out where to start. David had been with the company for over 20 years and had seen Rebecca grow the business from a small repair garage to a multi-location operation. I needed someone to guide me through the transition, someone who understood how things worked. But I was also wary. I didn't know if David was just waiting for me to falter so he could take over. I had heard rumors about him wanting to climb higher within the company, and now, with Rebecca gone, I didn't know if I could trust anyone. I needed to know if the company could stand on its own, or if it would crumble under the weight of her absence. When David came into the shop the next morning, I could tell he was just as uncomfortable as I was. We exchanged pleasantries, but it didn't take long for the silence to fall between us. Finally, I spoke. David, I'm not sure where to start. I've got the business side of things, but I've never run a company like this. You know Rebecca better than I do. You know the people, the clients. Can you help me figure out where to go from here? He looked at me for a moment, weighing his words carefully. Finally, he sighed and sat down on a nearby stool. "Mark," he began, his voice low, "I've been with this company since the early days, back when your aunt had just started. We were a small operation then, just a handful of guys fixing cars and trying to make a name for ourselves. But Rebecca, she always knew how to grow things. She knew what the future needed, how to move the company into new areas. And now with you here, well, it's going to be different." I nodded, unsure what to say. It was clear David respected Rebecca, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still sizing me up. I was the one standing between him and what could be a bigger role, a bigger piece of the pie. "I don't expect you to run the company on your own, Mark," David continued. "But I will tell you this. It's not just about fixing cars anymore. It's about running a business, managing people, finances, clients. We've got employees depending on us, and we've got clients who expect us to deliver. It's a lot, but if you're willing to learn, I can help you." His words hung in the air. I wasn't sure if it was reassurance or just another way of saying, "You're in over your head." Either way, it felt like the world was about to close in on me. My heart pounded in my chest, my palms began to sweat, but I forced myself to take a breath and respond. "I can handle it, David. I have to. It's what she wanted, and I won't let her down." David nodded slowly, and for the first time, I thought he might actually believe me. "All right, let's get started then. We'll begin with the basics, the financials, the current contracts, the staff. You're going to need to make decisions quickly, Mark. The business doesn't wait." For the next few days, I immersed myself in the details. I spent hours going over the company's financial statements, trying to wrap my head around the numbers. There were a lot of them: assets, liabilities, accounts receivable, accounts payable, and much more. I felt like I was drowning in it all. Rebecca had built an empire, but it was a complicated one, and I wasn't sure I was the right person to navigate the stormy waters ahead. At the same time, I started meeting with the rest of the employees, the shop workers, the office staff, and even a few of the higher-ups. Some were eager to meet me, others not so much. It was clear that Rebecca's influence still loomed large in the company. They all respected her, and many weren't sure what to make of me. I wasn't the polished corporate executive they had expected to take over. I was just a guy who had been fixing cars for most of his life, now suddenly thrust into a world I wasn't sure I understood. Still, I pushed forward. I began making small changes, familiarizing myself with the day-to-day operations, trying to connect with the employees and clients. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I couldn't just let this inheritance sit idle. I had to prove that I was capable of handling it, that I was more than just a repairman. But as the days passed, I couldn't help but wonder if Rebecca's decision had been a mistake. Was I ready for this? I wasn't sure anymore. The money was nice, yes, but it came with an overwhelming weight, one that felt heavier with each passing day. One evening, after the shop had closed and I was sitting alone at my desk, I glanced over at the stack of papers Rebecca had left behind. There was a folder with her personal notes, a few business contracts, and even some handwritten suggestions for the company's future. I opened the folder, and as I flipped through the pages, one thing stood out. A letter written by Rebecca herself. It was addressed to me, and it read, "Mark, I know this decision might seem strange to you, but I believe you have more potential than you think. You've always been a man of integrity, and that's something this business needs now more than ever. The world has changed, and I want you to build something that will last. Don't just fix cars. Fix what needs fixing in the world. You're more capable than you know. I believe in you. Rebecca." The letter felt like a lifeline, a rope thrown to me in a sea of uncertainty, and for the first time since I'd inherited the business, I felt a sense of purpose. It wasn't about the money, or the power, or even the business. It was about living up to Rebecca's faith in me, about building something that could make a real difference. I wasn't ready, but maybe I could get there. It's strange how quickly things can change. Just a few weeks ago, I had been perfectly content running my small auto shop, my days filled with the simple rhythm of wrenching tools and working on cars. Now I was drowning in meetings, financial reports, and trying to wrap my head around the responsibility of running an empire. It didn't feel real. It felt like I was wearing someone else's shoes, and they were far too big for me. The first few days at the office were like walking through a fog. I tried to remind myself that Rebecca had believed in me. She'd left me this business because she thought I had the integrity and work ethic to keep it going. But the more I learned, the more overwhelmed I became. There were contracts to manage, employees to oversee, decisions to be made that affected the lives of more than just the workers at the shop. And yet, no matter how hard I tried, it never felt like enough. I spent hours each day in Rebecca's old office, trying to get a handle on things. Her desk, her chair, her files, all of it felt like it belonged to someone else, like I was an imposter pretending to take over. Johnson Automotive Enterprises was no longer just a local repair shop. It had expanded into multiple locations, with contracts for fleet maintenance, corporate partnerships, and even a few clients in industries I didn't fully understand. David Perkins, the shop manager, had been right. This was not just about fixing cars anymore. It was about managing a business, making decisions that could affect hundreds of lives. One afternoon, after a particularly draining day of meetings, I found myself sitting at Rebecca's desk, staring at a pile of contracts I had yet to review. I had never imagined anything like this for myself. I had always been content with the simplicity of my life, fixing cars, building relationships with customers, and being there for my family. But this was different. This was far beyond what I had ever considered. As I sat there, the door to the office opened. It was Sarah, my wife, looking as concerned as I had ever seen her. She'd noticed the change in me over the past few weeks. I was barely home, distracted when I was, and I could tell it was wearing on her. She walked over to my desk and sat down in the chair across from me. "You okay?" she asked, her voice soft but laced with concern. I tried to smile, but it felt like a lie. "Yeah, just a lot to handle. I never imagined this, Sarah. I'm not sure I can do it." Her eyes softened, and she reached out to touch my hand. "You don't have to do it alone, Mark. You've always been good at building relationships. You're good at talking to people, at listening. I know you've got it in you to make this work." Her words hit me harder than I expected. In all the chaos, in all the confusion, I had forgotten what mattered most. People. The relationships that had helped me build my life in the first place. Trust. Loyalty. I'd built my business on those principles. It was time I took a step back and remembered that. "I don't know where to start, Sarah. There's so much to do, so much I don't understand. Start with what you know," she said, squeezing my hand. "You don't have to fix everything all at once. Take it one step at a time. And don't forget, you've got a team who believes in you. You've got David, you've got the employees. They're all part of this too." Her words hit home. I had spent so much time focusing on the big picture, the financials and the numbers, that I had forgotten the most important part of any business. The people. My employees were the backbone of this company, and I needed to treat them like it. Trusting them, delegating when I needed to, and involving them in decisions was the only way I could make this work. The next morning I made a decision. I called a meeting with the core team, David, the shop managers, and a few of the long-time employees. We needed to talk, and we needed to be honest about where the company was and where we were going. The meeting was small but powerful. David kicked it off, speaking about the future of the company and how we could continue to grow without losing the heart of what made us successful, our commitment to quality and service. I added my thoughts, telling everyone that I wasn't going to try to be Rebecca. I was going to be myself. I wasn't perfect, but I was willing to put in the work, to learn, and to trust them to help me along the way. As I spoke, I could feel a shift in the room. These people, my employees, weren't looking for a boss who knew everything. They were looking for someone they could trust, someone who would lead by example and make decisions that took their needs and the company's goals into account. After the meeting, David pulled me aside. "You did good, Mark," he said, his approval written clearly in his eyes. "You don't have to know everything right now. Just keep listening to the people who know what they're doing, and you'll get there." It was the first time I felt like maybe I was starting to get this. Maybe I didn't have to be Rebecca or anyone else. I just had to be Mark, the same Mark who had started with nothing but a wrench and a dream, who had built relationships with customers and turned that into something real. That afternoon, I made a call to one of the major clients we had, a corporate fleet contract I had inherited. I had no idea what I was doing, but I needed to prove to myself that I could handle it. The call started rough, with me fumbling through the details, but as the conversation progressed, I found my footing. I began talking less about the business and more about what they needed. We were going to work together, find solutions that fit both of our needs, and make sure we were providing the service that made us stand out. When I hung up, I couldn't believe it. I had done it. It wasn't perfect, and I still had a long way to go. But that one call, that one moment of confidence, changed everything for me. I was starting to believe in myself again, starting to see that I was capable of leading this company. The road ahead would be tough, but I wasn't alone. I had my family, my employees, and Rebecca's legacy to guide me. And for the first time since I'd inherited everything, I felt like I was on the right path. The weeks that followed the meeting felt like a blur. I was in the office every day, trying to learn the ropes of running a business much bigger than I had ever imagined. At the same time, I was still managing the auto shop, trying to keep the engine running while learning how to steer a ship I didn't fully understand. Every morning, I sat at Rebecca's old desk, papers scattered around me, trying to make sense of the financial reports, contracts and emails. I would call David for advice on something new, and he'd walk me through it patiently, always ready with a practical solution, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still fumbling my way through everything. It was clear now. Running a company wasn't just about fixing problems. It was about foresight, about making decisions that would keep the business growing, and that was something Rebecca had excelled at. She had built this empire from the ground up, while I had spent most of my life with my hands in the grease, solving immediate problems one at a time. Now I had to think long-term, and that was something that terrified me. One of the first things I decided to do was get to know the clients. I had always been good with people. Customers trusted me with their cars, and that was a relationship built on years of honesty and hard work. But now I had to apply that same approach to clients with multi-million-dollar contracts, people who didn't just care about how their cars ran, but about the numbers, the deadlines, and the service. It was a different world, but it was one I had to step into if I wanted to make this work. I scheduled a meeting with James Carmichael, the CEO of one of our biggest corporate clients. His company was one of our largest contracts, and I knew I needed to make a good impression. The first few minutes were awkward. Me, the guy who had never even worn a tie to work, sitting across from a sharp-dressed businessman in a sleek office that smelled like leather and ambition. But as the conversation went on, I started to feel more comfortable. I found myself talking less about the business side of things and more about what he needed, about how we could make his company's fleet run more efficiently. I wasn't just selling services anymore. I was selling myself, my ability to make things happen, just like I had done at the shop. When the meeting ended, I felt a sense of pride that I hadn't felt in a long time. I had made it through, and we had a plan in place to improve their services. The deal wasn't finalized yet, but I had earned his trust. I realized, as I shook his hand and walked out of his office, that this wasn't just about money or ownership. It was about relationships. Rebecca had built this company by nurturing connections, and now it was my turn to continue that. But even with that success, I couldn't shake the feeling of imposter syndrome. The other day, after another long meeting with suppliers, I stood in front of the mirror in my office, staring at the reflection of a man who seemed like he was playing dress-up. I wasn't Rebecca. I didn't have her instincts, her business savvy, her confidence. I had been lucky to get this far, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. I needed to learn from the people around me, the ones who had seen Rebecca through her success. One afternoon, David came to me with a concern. "Mark," he said, his voice low and serious, "we're seeing some pushback from a few of the employees. There's tension in the air and it's affecting morale." I knew exactly what he meant. The workers in the shop had been used to Rebecca's leadership style. She was strict, precise, and always in control. I wasn't sure what kind of leader I was yet. I didn't want to be the type of boss who just barked orders, but I didn't want to be a pushover either. The employees had known Rebecca as the one who kept the business thriving, and now I was the one who had to make sure it stayed that way. That evening, I made a decision. The next morning, I called a meeting with the shop floor team. I had to show them that I wasn't just Rebecca's nephew taking over because of family. I had to show them that I cared about them, that I was there for more than just the paycheck. We sat in the break room. The usual hum of activity paused as the team gathered. I could see the skepticism in their eyes, the uncertainty about what was coming. I started by talking about the changes I had been working on, the contracts, the expansions, the things I needed them to understand. But then I paused, took a breath, and said something that came from the heart. "Look, I know this is different," I said. "I'm not Rebecca, and I'm not here to try and be her, but I am here to make sure this company grows and that we all succeed together. I need your trust. I need your support. And I'm willing to listen to you if you've got concerns, ideas, or even criticisms. This isn't just my company. It's ours." There was silence for a moment, and then David spoke up. "I think we can make this work, Mark," he said, and I saw a few of the other workers nod in agreement. It wasn't perfect. Some people were still unsure. But I had started something. Dialogue. Trust. That was the first step. As the weeks went by, I began to feel the weight of the company slowly lift off my shoulders. I had spent so much time worrying about whether I was enough for this job, whether I was ready, but I realized something crucial. I didn't have to have all the answers. What I needed was to surround myself with the right people, people who believed in the company, people who were ready to help me lead it to the next chapter. One night, as I sat at my desk reviewing some figures, I received a call from an old friend. It was Tom Walker, a former business mentor of mine who had worked in the automotive industry for decades. We hadn't spoken in a while, but he had always been a sounding board for my ideas. "Mark," he said when I picked up, "I heard about the inheritance. I'm proud of you, man, but I want you to remember one thing. Success doesn't come from doing things alone. It comes from knowing when to trust the right people and when to ask for help." I smiled, feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. Maybe that was the missing piece. It wasn't about trying to fill Rebecca's shoes. It was about building my own path, learning from the people who had been in this world longer than I had, and surrounding myself with people who could help carry the load. I was learning, slowly but surely, that the real success wasn't in the profits or the expansion. It was in how I led, how I built relationships, and how I kept my values intact while growing something meaningful. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, I felt ready for it. It had been a few months since I had taken over, and things were starting to settle into a routine. The initial chaos of the transition had calmed down, but the challenges kept coming. It was a constant balancing act between keeping the auto repair shop running smoothly and learning the ropes of a larger, multi-location business. Every day, I felt like I was being pulled in 100 different directions. Contracts to negotiate, new business partnerships to explore, employees to manage, and still the daily grind of fixing cars. There were moments when I felt completely overwhelmed, questioning whether I was even capable of handling it all. But through it all, something had changed within me. I had started to own the decisions I was making, to take responsibility for the outcomes. The weight of the company no longer felt like a burden. Sure, it was heavy, but it was my responsibility now. And for the first time, I felt like I had the power to shape the future, not just for the company, but for the people who depended on it. The turning point came one Friday afternoon. I had just finished reviewing some financial reports in my office when David came in, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a slight urgency. I knew something was off. "Mark, there's an issue with the new fleet contract we signed last month," he said, his voice tense. "They're threatening to pull out, and if we don't make some serious adjustments in the next week, we could lose a significant part of the business." I felt my stomach tighten. The fleet contract had been a major win for the company, bringing in a substantial amount of revenue. Losing it would be a huge blow, and I couldn't afford to let that happen. "What's the problem?" I asked, trying to stay calm, though I could feel the weight of the situation settling over me. "They're unhappy with the service," David continued. "There have been delays on some repairs, and we're not meeting the quality standards we promised. I've talked to the team, but they're spread thin with the other projects. We've got to do something fast if we want to salvage it." I ran a hand through my hair, frustration mounting. This wasn't the first time we had dropped the ball on a big contract. The pressure of maintaining quality while expanding the business was starting to show. We had taken on more than we could handle, and now it was coming back to bite us. "I'll talk to the team," I said, my voice firm. "We'll get this fixed." But even as I said the words, I felt the familiar rush of self-doubt creeping in. Was I really cut out for this? Could I really turn this around? I couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not after everything I'd worked for. I spent the next few hours going over the details of the fleet contract, reviewing the service records and talking to the team. There were a lot of moving parts, and the delays on some of the repairs had been due to supply chain issues and employee shortages. It wasn't an excuse, but it was the reality. We were understaffed, and our processes had become inefficient with the growth. I needed to fix that, quickly. After reviewing everything, I decided to meet with the fleet manager the following Monday, hoping I could salvage the relationship and prove we could still deliver. But it wasn't just about the fleet contract. This was about something bigger: quality control and communication. The issues with the fleet contract were symptoms of a larger problem that had been brewing for a while. The company had grown, but the internal systems hadn't kept up. We had expanded our reach, but we were still operating like a small auto shop with manual processes and too many gaps in communication. That weekend, I spent every spare moment thinking about the future of the business. I made a list: prioritize quality, streamline operations, improve communication. These weren't new ideas, but they were ones I hadn't fully implemented yet. I had been so focused on the financials and the big picture growth that I had neglected the foundation. If we didn't fix this, it was only a matter of time before more clients would start to complain. On Monday morning, I arrived at the shop early, well before the rest of the team. I sat in my office, the silence around me a reminder of how much was at stake. The sound of the front door opening and employees arriving for the day broke the stillness. I had to make a change. I needed to lead by example, but I also needed to give the team the tools they needed to succeed. I called a meeting with the department heads: David, Lena, who managed our service department, and Elliot, our operations manager. We gathered in my office, and I started by laying out the problem. "We've got a serious issue with our service quality," I said, "and we're not going to fix it by ignoring it or hoping it goes away. We need to get a handle on our operations, streamline our processes, and make sure our team has the support they need. I want us to look at every part of our operation and find where we're falling short." David nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He had always been the steady hand, the one who knew how to keep things running, but even he was feeling the pressure. "We've been stretched thin," he said, "but we can make adjustments. We can reallocate some resources and bring in temporary help if we need it." Lena spoke next. "It's not just the manpower, though. We've got a communication problem. The right hand doesn't always know what the left hand is doing. We need better systems in place for tracking jobs, from the initial request to the final delivery. Without that, we're running blind." I took a deep breath, realizing that this wasn't just a minor issue. It was systemic, but it was solvable. "Let's set up a task force. We'll start by improving our communication systems, getting the right people in place, and looking at automating some of our tracking processes. I want to get back to a place where our clients trust us again, where they know we'll deliver. No excuses." The rest of the meeting was spent discussing the specifics: how we could implement changes, how we could better manage expectations, and how we could make sure we didn't lose any more clients. By the end of the day, I felt like we had a plan in place. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. We had set clear goals for the next quarter, and I knew I had to stay on top of them, pushing the team to meet our targets without burning them out. That afternoon, I called the fleet manager to apologize for the delays and schedule a meeting for the following day. When I walked into the meeting, I didn't try to make excuses. I just laid it out there. Our company had grown, and we were in the process of getting back on track. It wasn't a smooth ride yet, but I promised him that we would make it right. He listened, nodded, and agreed to give us a second chance. That moment, getting that client to trust us again, was a victory. It wasn't just about saving the contract, though. It was about the realization that we could fix this. As I sat back in my office that evening, looking over the notes from the meeting, I realized that this was the turning point. I had taken on a monumental responsibility, but I was beginning to see that the challenges I faced were opportunities in disguise. The company needed growth, but more importantly, it needed structure. It needed someone who wasn't afraid to make tough decisions and lead by example. And for the first time since I'd inherited everything, I felt like I could do it. I had been in over my head since the day I walked into Rebecca's office for the first time. Every decision felt like it carried a weight far heavier than I was used to. I had spent most of my life in the auto shop, turning wrenches and solving small, tangible problems. But now, I was dealing with something far more complex. People's lives, their jobs, and the future of an entire company. Every morning, the pressure seemed to grow, and I began to question if I was really the right person for the job. But then something happened. Something that made me realize that maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to make this work. It all started with the fleet contract crisis. I had thought we were done for, but by some miracle, and a lot of hard work from the team, we had managed to pull things together. We had a clear plan for improving our service quality, and I was starting to see the results. Clients were noticing the difference. Employees were starting to trust me more, not because of the money or the title, but because I was proving myself through action. I wasn't just talking about changes, I was making them happen. I began to understand that leadership wasn't about knowing everything or being the smartest person in the room. It was about listening and being willing to take the tough decisions, even if they didn't always feel comfortable. The more I embraced that, the more the company began to shift. I wasn't just a repairman anymore. I was becoming a leader, one who could inspire confidence in others, not through my position, but through my commitment to doing the right thing. As the months went by, I started focusing on the long-term vision of the business. The contracts were still important. Hell, they were essential. But what mattered more was building a sustainable future. Rebecca's legacy wasn't just about how much money we made. It was about how we treated our people, our clients, and the community. That's what she had always valued, even if I hadn't fully understood it back then. She wasn't just focused on growth for growth's sake. She believed in meaningful success. One afternoon, as I sat in my office going over the budget for the next quarter, I got a call from Lena, our head of service. Her voice was urgent. "Mark, we've got a problem," she said. "One of our major clients, Harper Enterprises, just called. They're saying they've had several service issues with their fleet, and they're considering moving to another provider." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. Harper Enterprises was one of our biggest clients, and losing them would be a major blow. The timing couldn't have been worse. We had been working on improving things, but this felt like a setback, like we hadn't done enough. The pressure to keep the business afloat was always lurking in the background, but now it was right in front of me, demanding action. "Where are we with the repairs?" I asked, trying to stay calm, though I could feel the tension rising in my chest. "We're behind, Mark. The team is swamped, and we're not meeting the turnaround times we promised. There's a backlog, and it's affecting our reputation," Lena replied, frustration clear in her voice. I paused, thinking quickly. This wasn't just about fixing the cars, it was about fixing the system. If we kept running things this way, we would continue to struggle with these issues. We needed a solution, and we needed it fast. "All right," I said, making a decision. "I'll call Harper Enterprises. Let me handle the conversation. In the meantime, I want you to get the team together. We need a strategy to catch up on this backlog, and we need it done quickly. Let's prioritize the most urgent jobs and get them out the door. I'll handle the rest." I hung up the phone, already formulating a plan. I wasn't going to sit back and let this happen. Harper Enterprises was depending on us, and I was not about to let them walk away. I had to take control of the situation, show them that we could fix it, and rebuild their trust. But I also realized that this was a wake-up call. The backlog wasn't the only issue we had. Our processes were inefficient, and it was hurting us. I called a meeting with David, Lena, and Elliot to discuss a company-wide strategy for improving our service efficiency. We needed better tracking systems, better communication, and a clearer service protocol. This wasn't just about fixing one problem, it was about preventing more from arising in the future. We had to be proactive, not reactive. We spent the next few hours going over the specifics. Lena and David were invaluable during the meeting, helping to identify where the breakdowns were happening. Elliot, who had a background in operations management, suggested we look into a digital solution for tracking repairs and streamlining communications between the different departments. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a necessary one. By the end of the day, we had a plan in place. We would implement new software to track each job's progress in real time, and we would set up a clearer system for prioritizing repairs based on urgency. The entire team was on board, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were all pulling in the same direction. The next morning, I called Harper Enterprises to personally apologize and set up a meeting. I knew that this could be a make-or-break conversation. I had to assure them that we were committed to resolving the issues and that we would deliver on the promises we had made. When I met with their operations manager, I was honest about the issues we had been facing, but I also presented the plan we had put together. I showed him that we were actively working to improve our service, and I offered a timeline for when we could catch up on the repairs. I didn't promise perfection, but I did promise that we would do better. To my surprise, they were receptive. They appreciated the honesty and the fact that I was taking responsibility. By the end of the meeting, they agreed to give us another chance, though they made it clear that they would be closely monitoring our performance. As I left the meeting, I felt a huge sense of relief. Harper Enterprises was staying with us. It was a victory, no doubt, but it also felt like a validation of everything I had been working toward. We weren't just fixing cars, we were fixing the systems that made us run. That night, as I sat in my office reflecting on the day, I realized something important. I was no longer just the guy who fixed things. I had grown into a leader, someone who could make decisions, handle crises, and drive the company forward. It wasn't about knowing everything. It was about being willing to learn, adapt, and take responsibility. And for the first time since I had inherited this business, I felt like I was truly on the path to making it my own. It's strange how life has a way of pushing you toward growth, even when you don't feel ready for it. Looking back, I can see the moments when I almost gave up, when the weight of running Johnson Automotive Enterprises felt too heavy, and I questioned whether I was even capable of taking on such a massive responsibility. But after the Harper Enterprises situation, something shifted in me. I had faced a crisis head-on, come up with a solution, and kept a major client. More importantly, I had learned something that had been missing in the early days of my leadership. Trust. Trust wasn't just about my employees trusting me to lead. It was about me trusting them to get the job done, to help make this business work. For months, I had been trying to do it all on my own, convinced that if I didn't have all the answers, I wouldn't be able to succeed. But the truth was, I didn't have to do it all alone. I just had to be willing to listen, to lean on the people who had been with the company longer than I had, who knew its strengths and weaknesses, and who could offer insight into the changes we needed to make. With the Harper Enterprises deal behind us, I decided to take a step back and really look at the company, its culture, and its people. We had made strides, but we still had a long way to go. I couldn't afford to make the same mistakes again, to let the same issues pile up without addressing them. We needed a long-term strategy, one that went beyond just solving individual problems as they arose. I wanted to build a company that was efficient, that didn't just survive but thrived in a competitive market. One morning I called a meeting with David, Lena, and Elliot. It was time for us to talk about the bigger picture, to set a vision for the future. We gathered in the conference room, and I could sense the anticipation in the air. It wasn't just about fixing cars anymore. It was about defining what we wanted for this company. I began the meeting by being honest with them. "Listen," I said, Looking around the table, I know I've been focused on the immediate issues, the backlog, the service quality, the contracts, but I think it's time we talk about the future, about where we want this company to go and how we're going to get there. I don't want to just fix problems as they come. I want to build something sustainable, something that lasts. Lena was the first to speak. I think that's exactly what we need, Mark. We've been stuck in the weeds for too long, and while it's been necessary, we need to start thinking about the bigger picture. If we want to grow, we need to improve our operations, streamline processes, and stay ahead of the competition. We can't keep patching things up as we go. David nodded in agreement. I've been here long enough to know that the foundation of this company is strong, but it's time to build on that foundation. We've got the talent, the reputation, and the resources to grow, but we need to be more strategic. I felt a surge of hope. This was the conversation I had been waiting for. For the first time, I wasn't just hearing criticism or concern. I was hearing collaboration, people who were willing to work together to make the company better. We spent the next few hours brainstorming, setting goals, and discussing how we could improve every part of the business. We talked about upgrading our systems, improving our employee training programs, and finding new ways to increase customer satisfaction. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but we were committed to it. The company had changed, and we needed to change with it. By the end of the meeting, we had a clear set of goals. We would implement new tracking systems for better inventory management, streamline our communication processes, and create a more dynamic and efficient workforce. It wasn't just about fixing the problems that had come up in the past. It was about anticipating the problems of the future and being proactive. As the days passed, I found myself growing into my role in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was no longer just the guy who had inherited a business. I was becoming a leader, someone who could set a vision, make decisions, and guide the team toward a common goal. I wasn't perfect, but I was trying, and that was enough for now. But even as things started to improve, I couldn't escape the nagging thought in the back of my mind. Was I really ready for this? Every day I faced new challenges, and with each one I had to make a choice, to step up and lead or to step back and let the company slip away. It wasn't easy, and I didn't always get it right. There were moments when I still doubted myself, when I thought about walking away and letting someone else take the reins. But every time that thought crept into my mind, I remembered why I was here. I wasn't just here for the money or the status. I was here because I believed in this company, in what it could become. One evening, after a long day, I sat alone in my office, reflecting on how far we had come. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about the people who depended on it. We had employees who had been with us for years, people who had trusted us through the tough times, and I couldn't let them down. The weight of that responsibility wasn't always easy to carry, but it gave me a sense of purpose that I had never had before. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't alone. I had a team. I had people who believed in me and the company. I had Sarah, who was always there to support me, even when I couldn't see the way forward. And I had Rebecca's legacy, which, whether I was ready or not, had been handed to me. The road ahead was still long, and the challenges would keep coming. But for the first time since I had inherited the business, I felt like I was building something real, something that mattered. And no matter how hard it got, I knew I couldn't stop now. The next morning, as I walked into the shop, I saw the familiar faces of the employees, each one working hard, just like always. But today, it felt different. Today, it felt like we were all moving in the same direction, like we were all part of something bigger than just fixing cars. For the first time, I knew that this was mine, and I was ready to make it work. I had always prided myself on keeping things simple. I'd grown up in a family where hard work meant stability, and my world had been defined by a solid, reliable rhythm, fixing cars, dealing with customers, and going home to my wife at the end of the day. But now, with Johnson Automotive Enterprises under my control, I realized that simplicity wasn't enough anymore. I had inherited not just a company, but a legacy, a network of relationships, responsibilities and expectations that I couldn't ignore. The first 6 months had been a blur. There were moments when I felt like I was getting the hang of it, working with my team, managing clients and putting out fires as they popped up. But there were also moments when I felt completely out of my depth. I still had that nagging voice in the back of my head that questioned whether I was truly capable of running this empire. Rebecca had built something incredible, and it was hard not to feel like an imposter in her shoes. She had vision, drive, and a level of ambition that I couldn't help but admire. I, on the other hand, was still trying to figure out how to manage a fleet of vehicles and a team of employees without letting everything fall apart. But something had changed over time. I started to understand that I didn't need to be Rebecca. I didn't need to have her exact approach to success. What I needed was to be true to myself, to use the strengths I had honed over the years, and to trust in my own judgment. After all, Rebecca had chosen me for a reason. She had left me this business because she saw something in me that I hadn't fully recognized yet. The shift from feeling like a caretaker of her legacy to someone who was shaping the future of the company was slow, but it was finally starting to settle in. It wasn't just about managing the company anymore. It was about building something new. Every conversation I had, every decision I made, was leading me down a path I hadn't imagined when I first took over. There were still days when I felt like I was treading water, but I was starting to see a clearer path ahead. This company, which had once seemed like a set of problems to solve, was becoming my own project, my own responsibility. One day I sat in my office, staring at the reports for the upcoming quarter. The numbers were promising. Our sales were up, customer satisfaction was improving, and we had secured a few new contracts that would take the business to the next level. But something was still missing. I had pushed the team hard, and we had accomplished a lot, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more we could be doing, something that would take us from simply surviving to thriving. That's when the idea hit me. What if we could expand our reach beyond just auto repairs? What if we could start offering more services that were related to the auto industry? Things like vehicle maintenance programs for small businesses, extended warranties, or even online sales for aftermarket parts. There was potential here, untapped potential that we hadn't even begun to explore. I spent the next few weeks researching the market, talking to industry experts, and getting feedback from our customers. It became clear that we were well positioned to offer more than just the typical auto repair services. We had the expertise, the customer base, and the reputation to expand our offerings in a way that would set us apart from the competition. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like the next logical step. I called a meeting with David, Lena, and Elliot to pitch the idea. I think we're ready to take this business to the next level, I started, my excitement growing as I spoke. We've built a solid foundation, but now it's time to think bigger. What if we expanded our services? What if we offered maintenance programs, warranties, and online sales for parts? It could set us apart from the competition, and it would give us a way to build stronger, long-term relationships with our clients. David leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. "It's an interesting idea, Mark," he said, "but it's going to take a lot of work to implement. We'll need new systems, new marketing, and we'll have to train the team to manage these new offerings. But I like it. If we can pull it off, it could really differentiate us." Lena chimed in next. "We've already been talking about improving our customer relationships, and this could be the perfect way to do it. If we can offer something beyond just repairs, something that keeps customers coming back, I think we'll have a better shot at long-term success." Elliot agreed. "It's ambitious, but I think it could work. We'll need to do some upfront work, but once we've got everything in place, it could create a whole new revenue stream." That conversation felt like a breakthrough. We were all in agreement. This was the direction we needed to go. Over the next few months, we worked tirelessly to implement the plan. We revamped our marketing strategy, trained the team on the new services, and launched our online platform for parts sales. It wasn't easy, but we were all committed to making it work. The hard work paid off when our customer base grew, our revenue increased, and the company began to feel like it was truly on the path to something bigger than any of us had imagined. But it wasn't just about the numbers. For the first time, I felt like I was leading this company, not just managing it. I was making decisions that would shape its future, decisions that would leave a mark on the industry. I could see the potential for growth, not just in the business, but in myself. As the months went by, I started to feel a sense of accomplishment I had never known before. The changes we had implemented were paying off, and the company was stronger for it. But I also realized something else. I had come a long way since I had taken over. I wasn't the man who had inherited a business he didn't understand. I was now someone who had built something new, who had faced the challenges and come out the other side stronger. One afternoon, as I walked through the shop, seeing the employees working together, the team thriving, and the clients smiling as they picked up their cars, I finally allowed myself to feel proud. The work wasn't done, and I knew that the road ahead would still be filled with challenges. But for the first time, I felt like I was truly leading. I wasn't just trying to fill Rebecca's shoes anymore, I was wearing my own. And for the first time, I felt confident that this was my company, and I was ready for whatever came next. In life, growth often comes from stepping into the unknown and facing challenges head-on. It's easy to stay in your comfort zone, especially when things feel familiar and manageable. However, real progress happens when you're willing to push yourself beyond what you think you're capable of. Whether you're inheriting a business, facing a personal challenge, or pursuing a new career, it's essential to embrace responsibility and take ownership of your decisions. Understand that success isn't about perfection. It's about learning from failures, adapting, and finding the courage to try again. Surround yourself with people who believe in you, but also listen to others. Often, the best solutions come from collaboration, from recognizing that you don't have to do everything alone. Be willing to ask for help, trust the process, and build relationships based on integrity and shared goals. In moments of doubt, remember that the road to success is never linear. Keep going, even when things get tough, because with persistence and the right mindset, you can turn challenges into opportunities. Lead with empathy, listen more than you speak, and remember that the journey, not just the destination, defines your path forward.